this seems like a great time to share that I hope, Kathleen, I can see you in person in real life next convention.
That's the truth.
Kathleen, I know I am talking your ear off tonight, but I have another question for you. I can certainly wait if you're busy.
Yes, Joshua. I'm sorry, I'm over here checking people in, so.
You know what? It's totally fine, and I answered it myself. We're fine.
Wonderful, thank you.
Get back there and
Candace Van Doris, if you're at your computer, I've requested you unmute if that is possible. I just had a question.
Sorry, Kathleen, who is that directed to?
Candace Van Doris, I think is
Sorry.
probably. And so since I'm not hearing from Candace, Isabel Bradley, are you available to unmute yourself?
Yes.
Hi, Isabel. So we got word from someone that Candace is here as an alternate for you, but you are here. So can I get do you know who the delegates from Woodstock are going to be?
Well, I thought it was, I checked this with our church secretary, and she confirmed that there had been a question that I was going to be in England. So I'd spoken to Candace about, if I were to do that, but it turned out that I hadn't been cancelled out. So I'm here. If Candace wants to be in my place, that's fine. I can step away, but I am here, and that's what I confirmed with the church secretary before.
Okay, is there some way for you and Candace offline to work that out and let us know in the chat which one of you is going to be the registered delegate?
All right, I'll give her a phone call right now.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
See what happens.
Right. Kathleen,
Yes.
we're just doing a little experiment that I've hooked that owl back up per Bishop's request. And
Just a
she's got
test.
her laptop up and we're doing a little test. So to see if she can be on her laptop so she can still be a separate screen, but then talk through the owl.
Okay, and I'm
And we're gonna
making,
test that sound.
And it says join audio. I'm gonna say yes, but then tell it to stop, because I don't know if I tell it not to, it will. If I say don't join audio, will it be okay, do you think?
Yes, it just won't, you won't.
Okay, so that makes it even better.
Yep.
I won't need to hear them. Okay, that's perfect. Got it. All right. Okay, so can you hear me well?
yes.
Yay, the experiment worked. All this fretting. I thought about this late into the night, and here we are. It worked. Okay.
Great, then I think we're good.
All right, so I'm gonna go get Tom, and we'll do the same.
Right, yeah.
All right. I am now unmuted. Hello, this is Candace.
Yes, hello.
Hi there. I was just talking with Isabel, and we just crossed our wires with the church secretary. She's going to be the delegate since she is in town now. And I will
Wonderful.
sign off.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All
All right.
right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I have problems.
Thank you for bearing with us while we just finish up letting folks in. Welcome.
You are not.
Wait, read it again.
That's right.
All right, sorry.
There you go.
All right, we've dealt with our little sound issue. Welcome, everyone. I want to say that we have somewhat of a head table here this evening, and all of us have been tested and do not have COVID, and so we are not infecting each other, and that's why we are unmasked in this room together this close. So we are ready to begin our worship, and I understand that a link to the worship bulletin is in the chat box. We acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Abenaki people on which we are worshiping, praying, and celebrating today. We honor the Abenaki people who have been living and working on this land from time immemorial. We recognize that colonialism and the oppression of Native peoples is a current and ongoing process, and we commit to building our awareness of our present participation. And so, we give thanks for those who have come before us, honoring the legacy of Vermont's Indigenous people, the Abenaki people of the Dawn. We are grateful for the care and sharing of this land. Before we begin our work tonight, let us first hear and meditate on the words and teachings of Jesus and offer our prayers.
A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking towards them on the lake. But when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. He said, come. So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, you of little faith, why did you doubt? When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches.
Thanks be to God.
Loving God, you fill all things with fullness and hope that we can never comprehend. Thank you for leading us into a time where more of reality is being revealed for us all to see. We pray that you will take away our natural temptation for cynicism, denial, fear, and despair. Help us have the courage to awaken to greater truth, greater humility, and greater care for one another. May we place our hope in what matters and what lasts, trusting in your eternal presence and love. Listen to our heart's longings for the healing of our suffering world. In the silence of your heart or in the chat box, please add your own prayers of intercession. Knowing, good God, you are hearing us better than we are speaking, we offer these prayers in all the holy names of God. Amen. Almighty and ever-living God, source of all wisdom and understanding, be present with those who take counsel in the Episcopal Diocese of Vermont for the renewal and mission of your church. Teach us in all things to seek first your honor and glory. Guide us to perceive what is right, and grant us both the courage to pursue it and the grace to accomplish it. Through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
I have been advised that 88 delegates representing 38 of 42 congregations and 45 of 71 eligible canonically resident clergy are duly registered for this convention and are gathered together on the convention Zoom meeting platform. Accordingly, we have a quorum. Pursuant to Title I, Canon 1.3 and 6, Vermont canons, a list of canonically resident clergy present and entitled to vote, and a list of congregations with lay delegates present and entitled to vote is available. Pursuant to Canon 1.8, I appoint Joshua Cheney as Secretary of the Convention and Pamela Vandegraff as Assistant Secretary of the Convention. These appointments are subject to confirmation by vote of convention. The question before the convention is, shall convention confirm the appointments of the Secretary of Convention and the Assistant Secretary of Convention? And is there any discussion? The matter before us is the convention's confirming of these appointments. A Zoom poll will be appearing on your screen shortly. Vote yes to confirm the appointments and vote no to withhold confirmation. Okay, 100%
Recording in progress.
100% confirmation. So I call on the Secretary of Convention.
The proposed rules of order for conducting business, Zoom instructions, and other housekeeping announcements were made available on the website by the Secretary of Convention. Please keep this information in mind as we conduct our business. A reminder about how to address the bishop as Bishop Shannon or Right Reverend Madam. Please use the raised hand function to be recognized by the Zoom host. Once you are recognized, you will be unmuted. Please begin by first clearly stating your name and congregation. If you have raised your hand in error or no longer need to be recognized, please press the raised hand button again so that you are no longer raising your hand. Please note you are welcome to chat with one another using the chat function, but this is not for official business. If you wish to be recognized and speak to convention, use the raised hand function. Any amendments to resolutions should be submitted to communications@diovermont.org by 6:30 p.m. for discussion by convention later in the evening. If anyone has a nomination from the floor for leadership position openings, email them to communications@diovermont.org to receive a link to the nominations form. Nominee information will then be emailed to convention delegates for consideration.
I now call on Tom Little, the Diocesan Chancellor, to explain the proposed rules of order as published in the pre-convention materials.
Thank you, Bishop Shannon. How is that? Thank you, Bishop Shannon. The rules of order were published in the pre-convention materials. They are virtually identical to the rules of order for prior diocesan conventions, and in particular, proposed rule of order 6 for remote conventions was adopted last year when we went remote for the first time. These are rules of order that have worked generally quite well. They adopt by reference Robert's rules of order if we get to the point where we need to refer to Robert's rules of order. There are provisions for how we handle elections, resolutions, and so forth. I will be speaking in a moment to other best practices for parliamentary procedure and debate. But I think Bishop Shannon, it would be in order now to solicit a motion and a second to adopt the rules of order.
I call on for a motion to accept the rules of order for this convention.
Scotty Emery Jin has a hand up.
I move that we accept the rules of order from Trinity and Shelburne.
Is there a second?
Lee Crawford has her hand up.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? The question before us is the motion to accept the proposed rules of order. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to accept the rules of order and no to reject the rules of order. We're finished. Okay, we have 100% approval of this call to accept these rules of order. The next order of business is presenting the annual convention reports for acceptance. A link to the pre-convention journal can now be found on the diocesan website and in the chat box. I call for a motion to accept the reports. Please use the raised hand function and remember to clearly state your name and congregation when moving and seconding motions.
Paul Olson,
Is there a second?
Jane Lolax,
Is there any discussion?
I'm Jane Lolax. I attend St. Dunstan's in Waitsfield. I move that we second.
So there's no discussion?
no discussion.
All right. The question before us is the acceptance of convention reports. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to accept the convention reports and vote no to reject the reports.
One 100% I said yes.
Okay, we have 100% acceptance. So I call on Diocesan Chancellor Tom Little for remarks on the legislative process and a review of guidelines for time limits on discussion and debate on the budget resolution and all other resolutions.
Thank you, Bishop Shannon. I will, since I know I have a hard time remembering to do this myself, I'm going to reiterate what the secretary said a moment ago. If you wish to be recognized for any reason, use the raise hand function to be recognized. And then when recognized, you can unmute. And please state the name of your congregation. That's a big help for everyone. I have, I think, four things to say, four comments about how we conduct business this evening. I can think of three typical types of reasons for asking questions or making a comment. So once you have raised your hand to be recognized and have been recognized and you have unmuted and stated your congregation, please make it clear. Do you have a question? If so, state your question as a question. If you have a comment or a point to make, please state that succinctly. And third, if you have a parliamentary process question, please state that in the form of a process questions. All questions should be addressed to the bishop, who may refer them to another person for a response. Second, be cautious about making a motion to call the question or to terminate debate. Whenever someone makes that motion, they're stating their opinion that it's not possible that anyone else could have something helpful to the debate, which is a very powerful statement to make. So please be cautious about doing that. What typically happens is the debate winds down all by itself, and it isn't really necessary to make that motion and take a separate vote on it. Third, please stay focused on the question, which is whatever is pending before the convention. That will, when we get into questions and debate, typically be the resolutions. So just please be mindful and focused on which resolution is in front of the convention. Fourth, if you wish to offer an amendment to the language of a pending resolution, you must send the text of your proposed amendment to communications@diovermont.org so that it can be displayed to everyone and reviewed and to make sure that it's in proper order. Bishop Shannon, as I have done, I think for the past 25 conventions, I'm now going to suggest that Bishop, you ask the convention to agree by unanimous consent or seeing no objection to limit the debate on each resolution to no more than 20 minutes, and to also limit each speaker, other than the presenters of the resolutions, to not more than 2 minutes each, with no delegate speaking a second time until all others have spoken a first time. And these limits may be extended by a majority vote of convention, and the secretary will be keeping track of the time. Bishop Shannon?
Are there any objections to proceeding by unanimous consent as the Chancellor has suggested?
I do not see any hands raised.
Hearing no objection, the convention will proceed in this manner. And there's a link to the rules of order in the chat. The following clergy transitions have taken place this year. Ordained on June 22nd was Jack Karn. He was ordained to the diaconate in the Diocese of Texas by Bishop Catherine Ryan on my behalf. And then transferred in on March 12th was the Reverend Paul Olson. And he was received from the Diocese of Newark and was called as priest in charge of St. Stephen's in Middlebury. On June 9th, the Reverend Sarah Janolfi was received from the Diocese of Olympia and called as priest in charge of Trinity Rutland. On August 12th, the Reverend Canon Walter B. Brownridge was received from the Diocese of Maryland. On November 3rd, the Reverend Kevin Sparrow was received from the Diocese of Massachusetts and called as priest in charge of Christ Church, Montpelier. Then transferred out on February 4th, the Reverend Liam Muller was transferred to the Diocese of Southern Virginia. And on April 8th, the Reverend Norman McLeod III was transferred to the Diocese of Rhode Island. On July 8th, the Reverend Deacon Jack Karn was transferred to the Diocese of Texas. Let us take a moment to pray for those clergy who died this past year. We remember the Reverend Alfred A. Kramer, the Reverend Donald R. Morris, the Reverend William H. Atkinson, the Reverend John M. Miller Jr., and the Reverend John S. Mitchell. Let us pray. Almighty God, with whom still live the spirits of those who die in the Lord, and with whom the souls of the faithful are in joy and felicity, we give you heartfelt thanks for the good examples of all your servants, who, having finished their course in faith, now find rest and refreshment. May we, with all who have died in the true faith of your holy name, have perfect fulfillment and bliss in your eternal and everlasting joy, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The next order of business requires us to recess convention and convene as the incorporators of Brookhaven Home. The principal benefactor of Brookhaven, Skeva Spear, liked the idea of turning the Diocese of Vermont Convention delegates into incorporators who elect trustees through recessing the convention for that purpose. And so the articles of incorporation were written that way. I call for a motion to recess diocesan convention and convene as the incorporators of Brookhaven Home.
Charlie Ryan,
Is there a second?
Greta Geitley. Definitely.
Is there any discussion?
I don't see any discussion.
The question before us is recessing Diocesan Convention in order to convene as the incorporators of Brookhaven Home. Please vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to recess convention and convene as the incorporators of Brookhaven Home. Vote no to reject the motion to recess convention.
We have 132 yes and 2 no.
So the yeses have it. I now declare this convention the Brookhaven Incorporators Group and call to order the annual meeting of Brookhaven Home. The annual report of the Brookhaven Board of Trustees was duly filed and is included in the materials posted on the convention website. I call on Jenny Ogilvie, Chair of the Nominating Committee, for report and introduction of nominees to the Brookhaven Board of Trustees.
There are 4 nominees for Brookhaven trustees. Elizabeth Cooper Camp from Good Shepherd in Barry, Brett Murphy from St. Mary's in Northfield, Julie Jones Sussman from St. Mary's in Northfield, Nancy Watke from Christchurch in Bethel. The full nomination report is available on the diocesan website, and a link is available in the chat.
I call for a motion to elect all 4 uncontested nominees, Elizabeth Cooper Camp, Brett Murphy, Julie Jones Sussman, and Nancy Watke.
Alice Daly,
Is there a second?
Greta Guy.
Yeah.
Getline. Sorry, I have a block about that.
Is there any discussion?
Lisa Newton.
Okay.
Lisa, you may unmute.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Did you have a comment, Lisa?
No, I was not trying to make a comment. I was just trying to join in the general affirmation of our representatives there.
Oh,
I will now
okay.
remute.
Thank you.
No other discussion, right?
No.
The question before us is the election of 4 board members for Brookhaven Home. If you assent to election of the 4 board members, vote yes. If not, vote no.
Almost. Okay, we have 100% answered, 135 yay, and 1 no.
1 abstention.
Oh, 1 abstention.
So then the yeas have it. Thank you. Is there any other business to come before the annual meeting of the incorporators of the Brookhaven Home?
Do not see any hands raised, Bishop.
Seeing no other business coming before the Brookhaven meeting, the question before us is adjourning the annual meeting of the incorporators of Brookhaven Home and reconvening as the annual convention of the Diocese of Vermont. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen.
Voting is complete, Bishop, with 134 yes and 1 abstain and 1 no.
Okay, well, we shall reconvene. I call back to order the 231st Convention of the Episcopal Diocese of Vermont, being the 188th Annual Convention of the Diocese of Vermont. I call on Dr. Jerry Davis for his report.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening, and I look forward to the opportunity to share our budget work. You may note that the full and detailed spreadsheets with both the year-to-date budget for FY 2021 and the detailed budget proposed for next year have both been posted on the website. I'd like to share my screen now and go through a few slides with you. Let me just get these arranged. Can everybody see my slides now? Okay, good. Thank you. So what I'd like to cover in the next few minutes is a report on the year-to-date revenue and expenses, the mission support we've received from congregations and the bishop's appeal, and then focus on the integrated budget draft for the upcoming year. I'd like to keep discussion limited to after I've finished both halves of that, rather than stopping in the middle for any comments about the year-to-date. I hope that'll be all right with everyone. So our year-to-date. We're 3/4 of the way through the year. That means that if we planned a perfect budget and we were perfectly on target with our revenues and our expenses, everything would be at 75%. Naturally, it's not, this being somewhat less than a perfect world. Mission support from congregations stands at $607,000 as predicted by the budget, but in reality is $487,000. The budget that we'd originally predicted of $810,000, when this budget was crafted, what's now about almost a year and a half ago, was really unrealistic. And I think our experience in 2020, and certainly our experience in the year-to-date, has led us to revise that budget figure downwards by about $100,000. And so 3/4 of the way through the year, we are actually right about on target. And the participation and generosity of mission support from our parishes is right about where our revised estimates would predict it should be. The other parts of our budget are more or less on target. In terms of revenue, I would draw to your attention the fact that we have received forgiveness for the CARES Act loan, the federal loan that we had received in 2020. It's now been forgiven in 2021, so it now appears as part of our revenue. We're using some of the money from the Hunt Fund grant to support our operating budget. And so in total, we have net revenues of, or total revenues of about $837,000, which represents 84% of what we'd originally predicted. So we're a bit ahead in terms of revenues. In terms of expenses, similarly, most of our expenses are on target or slightly below. The personnel expenses are higher than we'd originally predicted because we have additional personnel that have been added and some others who've left, leading to a different number. Many areas such as administrative travel and expenses related to operating the office are below our budget predictions because of the limitations of COVID-19 have placed upon us. So in terms of our year-to-date, we have a net positive balance after 9 months. Contributions from parishes are below the approved budget, but not below our adjusted estimates. Our revenues from investments and other sustainable resources are on target, and the CARES Act loan, now forgiven, adds about $91,000 to our revenues for the current year. Now, if the net from the CARES Act were excluded, if we did not have that money, our current balance would be negative by about $43,000. Our expenses are slightly above budget, with some categories low due to COVID-19 and others larger than when the budget was originally planned a year ago. Note that the reserves include $17,300 from the CARES Act money that we will need to pay as part of our covenant to the wider Episcopal Church 2 years from now. The bishop's appeal has been wonderfully successful. Congratulations to all who contributed and to the bishop for a very successful effort. The total is now almost $62,000 as of the end of September. Most of that money was given with the donors indicating it should go towards the greatest need, with smaller amounts directed towards congressional leadership, creation care, and racial reconciliation. So that's been a wonderful result. As I mentioned, I'd prefer it if you would hold your questions until the discussion period at the end after we've presented the budget for the upcoming year. Now, this year, the budget is going to be seen in two forms, although they're very similar. In a few moments, I'm going to tell you about the integrated budget that was put together by the Budget Committee. At the same time, Canonical Communications, Rebecca Wilson, and Kathleen Moore, and our Dean Greta Getline worked on preparing a narrative budget, which appears on the website, and I hope you will look at it and read it there. It just explains in words what all of these numbers on the other side of the screen are referring to. The Budget Committee consists of the folks that you see over on the left, myself, Canon Brownridge, Dean Getline, Reverend Spainhour, Melanie Combs, Rebecca Wilson, and Kathleen Moore from Canonical Communications, and Rebecca Wilson from Canonical, as well as our financial administrator, Rich Segui. And I'd like to thank all of them for hard work and their diligence in putting together our efforts. This year, I'm really excited to be able to present a budget that hopefully will represent all of the various efforts and work of the Diocese of Vermont and includes both the operating budget that this convention is used to looking at, our usual revenues and expenses that constitute the usual activities and functions of the diocese, but also a non-operating budget of expenses that occur outside of our day-to-day activities. That's the definition of a non-operating budget. Revenues are coming from restricted or dedicated sources that target specific external activities. And our expenses are directed towards beneficiaries that by and large are external to the diocese in the strict sense of the day-to-day operation of the diocese. So let's look first at the operating budget. It consists of, as you might expect, revenues and expenses, and therefore an operating balance, which by our definition in preparing the budget is zero. In other words, we've matched the revenues and expenses. The non-operating budget also has revenues and expenses and is also crafted for a net zero balance. In addition, there's a grants and loans budget that at this point only has revenues because the expenses have not yet been dedicated, pardon me, by the Grants and Loans Committee. These can be looked at individually in terms of operating or non-operating balances, but also allow us to look at the totality of the revenues or expenses for the diocese and the totality of the net balance. Let's look first at the operating budget. This is the traditional budget that you've seen each year for many years. Mission support from congregations for the upcoming year is projected at $740,000. That is approximately the same as what we're predicting for the current year and is based both on our experience in the current year and also an average of what the actual contributions from our parishes have been for the last 3 years. Our investment income and miscellaneous income are similar to past years. You'll note that investment income is lower because we've shifted quite a bit of that into the non-operating budget, which I'll explain in a moment. We asked for a second federal loan/grant through the CARES Act in 2021. It was granted and paid, and we expect that it will be forgiven in 2022. So we're going to add that as revenue to our budget for the upcoming year. The wider Episcopal Church, the national Episcopal Church, is providing a COVID relief grant of $40,000 to any diocese that requests it. It's not restricted and can be used, I believe, for any good purpose that we wish. So we've added that to our operating budget as well. And then there's a portion of what we expect to receive as a Hunt Fund grant, which will also be devoted to operating. So the total of all these is $1,079,000. And as you can see, the large bulk of this, about a little over 2/3, is derived from mission support from congregations, and really emphasizes how critical that mission support is to the function of the diocese. Investment income and income from various grants constitute the rest, and also are obviously very important. Our expenses are listed here. The largest expense is for personnel, and the second largest is our contribution to wider church support. There are a number of other issues on here that I would highlight for your consideration. In particular, I draw your attention to our office expenses. The reason these look rather high is because this includes a $40,000 payment to Rock Point Commons for property management fee of all of the various properties that are still owned by the trustees of the diocese and located on the Rock Point Reservation. I'd also draw your attention to the reserves, and I'll show you those in a little more detail in a moment. There are a number of expenses which we set aside money for, either because we expect that they're going to occur within the next year, or they may be coming up in several years. It's sort of like saving money to fix the roof, because you know that some year the roof's going to need to be fixed. In particular, we've set aside $16,570 from the CARES Act money that we'll receive in FY22 in order to provide our contribution, our covenant, to the wider Episcopal Church in 2 years from that date. So we're setting that money aside, expecting to pay it in the future. I'd also draw your attention to a number of conferences which occur, but most of them occur either every other year, every third year, or even less frequently than that. But we set aside money for them so we don't have to bear the full expense in the year that the conference occurs. So our expenses, again, are dominated by personnel expenses. As you can see here, we are a service organization. That's not a surprise. Our contribution to the wider church, the red wedge that you see here, is the second largest. And then other portions are distributed as you've seen. The personnel expenses, about 70% of that is salary. An important part is the contribution for federal SECA and FICA and Medicare, health insurance and life insurance, and retirement funds for our clergy. I draw to your attention the total, as well as the fact that we have 4 clergy and 3 staff that are on this payroll. We've added a salary cost of living adjustment between the current year and the upcoming year of 2.5%. Note that the federal Social Security COLA increase is going to be more than twice that, 5.9%. But your budget committee and the bishop felt that trying to impose that on our parishes and on our Our diocesan budget was more than was appropriate. So we're stuck to 2.5%. So operating budget notes, the FY22 operating budget is slightly larger than was planned for last year. It's about 9% more. The request for mission support from contributions from parishes, however, is somewhat smaller than last year. It's about 91% of what we predicted last year. The mission support prediction is based on our experience over the last several years. The formula for mission support, how much each parish is asked to contribute, is exactly the same as it's been for the last 4 years. There are 4 tiers, which are based on the average of the 2018 through 2020 operating revenues. And these 4-tier percentages will be 11, 13, 15, and 16%, but are based on the FY22 real-time actual operating revenue that each parish receives. And that will be adjusted or trued up at the very end of the year. Personnel expenses are greater than last year's budget, the convention approved budget, but they are smaller than the actual expenses we anticipate for the current year. The cost of living adjustment of plus 2.5% applies to all personnel and is also recommended for the parishes and other agencies in the diocese. Non-renewable grants from the government and from the Episcopal Church will provide almost $134,000 or 12% contributed to this balanced budget. Let's look now briefly at the non-operating budget. These are revenues from dedicated restricted funds and grants, expenses directed to external beneficiaries, parishes, and clergy, or church-related organizations. The revenue sources are listed here and include our Hunt Fund grant that we anticipate, a number of restricted funds that are in the unit fund. These are restricted accounts that have to be spent for specific purposes, and we place them in the non-operating budget because they are generally passed through to parishes or to, for example, funding tuition for seminarians or the campus ministry at UVM. The Bishop's Appeal is also listed here and hopefully will be as successful next year as it has been this year. A total of $207,000 are anticipated as revenue for the non-operating budget. The expenses fall in 3 major categories. The Thrive program will expend about $13,500 in collaboration meetings, coordination expenses for the bishop, and consultants to help us with this process. Congressional and clergy support comprise another $72,000, and the third category is Episcopal mission and evangelism, which is $121,000. And note that this includes $55,000 as a mission support for Mission Farm down in Killington, and $40,000 as mission support for Rock Point Commons. So that's the balanced operating budget. And then the third portion are grants and loans. We expect that approximately $171,000 will be received from dividends from the various accounts in the unit fund that comprise the McClure Discipleship Discovery Funds, the Butterfield Grant Fund, and the Butterfield Revolving Loan Fund. And also we'll receive money through loan repayment from existing outstanding loans. The expenses on this budget, of course, have not been identified yet because those will depend on what is requested and what is approved by the Grants and Loans Committee. So those are our operating and non-operating budgets. And at this point, I'd like to stop and answer any questions that you may have about this. After you have questions, Ann Brown will present a budget resolution, which encapsulates the what I've just told you. And I think that any suggestions for changes or amendments to that would best be held for a discussion after the resolution has been presented. Thank you.
Joshua, are there any questions for Treasurer Davis?
Yes, there are two hands up right now. We see Richard Ward and Titus Pressler.
Right, whoever's first. Richard, are you first?
He is-
Richard is muted. There he goes. Now he's unmuted.
You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. First of all, I'm pleased to see in the budget the inclusion of the coordination with the Eastern Diocese of New Hampshire and Maine regarding sharing personnel and ministries going forward. But on the other hand, I'm a little distressed by the fact that we are spending an extra $100,000 this year on personnel. Several months ago in the magazine Living Church, Bishop Shannon wrote that the diocese was facing a financial crisis and with one key person leaving with the possibility of not being able to make a replacement. The proposed budget for 2022 now includes a replacement plus a new employee and a part-timer. These additional personnel are supported by the PPP loan and the National Church Grant, both of which may not be there in 2023. My question is, are the additional personnel for 2022 one-year contracts? And if they aren't, what is the plan going forward?
You've asked a key question, and I can answer the numbers, but I can't answer them. I think someone else should speak to the mission. As you know, Canon Lynn Bates retired, and Canon Walter Brownridge was hired in her place. There have been several. There are additional people that Bishop Shannon enlisted to help move forward the mission of the diocese. And at the moment, you are correct that the expenses to cover those personnel are bolstered by external funds that are not sustainable. Speaking purely for myself, there are a number of funds which in the diocese, which are available to the diocese, which could be redirected and repurposed in order to support those positions as well as other activities. And it's my understanding that it is the purpose of the Thrive program to try and identify exactly how to manage those resources of both personnel and finances in order to be able to achieve that. But I hope someone else will comment.
Okay. Well, I will speak to that briefly. One of the things that I do know is, in particular, the Hunt Fund grant that we receive every year. While planning for these other positions on staff, that has always also been something that is known that will help support those positions. But the other thing is, with being able to get on with whatever our future is going to be, that could not be left to myself and one canon. There's too much to be done with just two people. We would have less of a sense of where we're supposed to head. We'd have less of a sense of who we are and what we need as a diocese if we left that to just a couple of people. And so, you know, care has been taken, and I figure if we're going to do this well, we have to do it right. And so we have done shuffling, and we'll continue to do so, because this is very important that we're able to be present to our congregations, and to especially dealing with congregational vitality, but I could go on forever about that, and I won't. But we've planned ahead. So I'm finished.
Thank you, Bishop. Titus Pressler.
Thank you very much for an excellent financial presentation, both on 2021 and upcoming 2022. Does the Budget Committee have a sense of why mission support contributions from parishes have declined from what was originally proposed in 2021? In other words, what are you hearing from congregations that have been unable to pledge as they had hoped? That would just give us all a sense of dynamic potential pressures in the diocese.
Let me thank you. That's a very important question, and I hope I can respond to it both to your satisfaction and so it's understandable. Parishes don't pledge. Their assessment is a request that is purely based on their operating revenue and whatever tier they fall into based on that operating revenue. For example, if they have an operating revenue that's between $50,000 and $100,000, they're in tier 2, and they're asked to provide 13% of their operating revenue. Now, so they don't make a dollar pledge at the beginning of the year and fall short. It's whatever they get, and then it's a percent, and it's adjusted up or down after the end of the year. So if they took in more revenue than they've actually paid on a monthly basis for their fair share, they get money back. And if they paid less, we request that they pay more. So it isn't really a pledge that anybody falls short on. It's just arithmetic. But the really important question is, why is the arithmetic coming up with less money than we thought it originally might? I think that there are probably two major reasons. First of all, many of our parishes are shrinking. And so they have fewer pledgers and less money that's coming in from that source. And that's a core problem. The people who continue to pledge have every year have increased their pledges. So the net pledge and plate collections for the parishes of Vermont has remained relatively more steady than the number of pledgers. So there's a downward trend there, and that's to me a really worrisome one. The other explanation, which I view as a much more optimistic one, is that just as many of our operating expenses at a diocesan level decreased during COVID-19, it did for many of the parishes as well. And many of the parishes rely on endowment money to balance their budget. And so even if they received pledges that are comparable to what they've gotten before, and many have, their need to draw on their endowment or even to use the dividends from their endowment may have been less because they have lower operating expenses. Now, this is obviously a work in progress, and we don't yet have all of the information from all of the parishes, but what I'm telling you is sort of derived from our analysis of the parochial reports from 2020. And so I'm being long-winded, but there are really two reasons why the contributions have gone down. The worrisome one, of course, is the number of pledgers and how much they give. The one that I think may be a more happy explanation is that their expenses went down, so they took less money. And that's the way the arithmetic works. So, you know, they don't give us more in order to make up for what they wouldn't have given us otherwise. Does that help your understanding?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? Hearing none, at least from my end, perhaps I'll turn it over to Josh or someone to call on Ann Brown to move the budget resolution.
Okay, so there's no questions?
There's no hands up, Bishop.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I would like to announce that our diocesan treasurer, Dr. Gerald Davis, will be retiring at the close of the convention. And please join with me in thanking him for 6 years of financial service to the diocese, years which included navigating an Episcopal transition, challenges of COVID-19, and a new look at the fiscal realities of our diocese. Thank you so much, Jerry. I will miss you and your attention to detail. But you are not leaving the diocese, and so don't be surprised if someone taps on your shoulder from time to time.
Thank you. May I say a word of thanks, Bishop?
Yes.
I just want to thank Bishop Shannon and the entire diocese for the opportunity to have served as treasurer for the last 6 years. It's really been an honor and a privilege for me to serve, and it's been fun. I've come to know so many of you, to admire the work that's done throughout the diocese, and to learn much more about the Episcopal Church and its people. The Church in Vermont is confronting many challenges, and it will experience many changes. But I believe the future is bright, and the Church is in very good hands. Many thoughtful, dedicated, and talented people will help Bishop Shannon to understand the needs and the opportunities of the Church in Vermont today. We have abundant and sufficient resources, both in money and in people. And I believe strongly that a renewed and invigorated Church will evolve. It's been my pleasure to be a small part of that process. And let me give my thanks to all of you for that chance. Thank you.
Thanks again, Jerry. In our diocese, the treasurer is nominated by the bishop and elected by diocesan council for a term of 3 years. I will be nominating Paul Horn of St. Stephen's, Middlebury, to diocesan council as our next treasurer. Paul is a recently retired vice president of finance for the Marmon Group, a Berkshire Hathaway business, who has extensive financial and operational management experience. Paul and his wife, Linda, live in Middlebury. They have 2 grown children. And we are already enjoying Paul's company, as he's been in the diocesan office quite often, as he serves also on several of our finance committees. I call on Ann Brown, Chair of the Resolutions Committee, to present and move approval of resolutions.
Thank you, Bishop Shannon. I'd like to begin by thanking members of the Resolutions Committee, Mike Austin, Stan Baker, Eric Davis, and Nancy Gordon. And special thanks to Eric Davis, who will go off the committee after this year. His plate is full with roles on Diocesan Council and Thrive, not to mention contributions to various media outlets for next year's elections. So thank you, Eric. I remind convention that the legislative process we agreed upon earlier permits a maximum of 20-minute discussion for each resolution, 2 minutes for each person. As Secretary of Convention, Joshua will keep time and let us know when we've reached the limit. Please use the raised hand function and wait to be recognized by the chair. At that point, you will be able to unmute yourself. Remember, clearly state your name and your congregation. Be mindful that we have 8 resolutions plus other convention business to get through tonight. So be sure to confine your comments to the actual subject of the resolution. If someone else has made the same or similar point, you may wish to lower your hand. I think everyone will be grateful for that. If you plan to make an amendment to a resolution, be sure to email it as soon as possible to communications@diovermont.org so it can be displayed properly on the screen. Our first resolution is adoption of the fiscal year 2022 integrated budget for the Diocese of Vermont, which was just presented by Treasurer Davis. It sets the operating, non-operating, and grants and loans budgets for 2022, as well as percentages for congregational contributions, and provides for adjustments in the event of surpluses or deficits. As chair of the Resolutions Committee, I move adoption of this resolution.
That's good.
Is there any discussion? And I invite also Treasurer Davis to remain unmuted so he may answer questions about this amendment, this resolution. Resolution.
I do not see any hands up for discussion.
Okay. The matter before us is resolution number 1, the resolution to adopt the fiscal year 2022 integrated budget. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to approve the resolution, vote no to reject the resolution. I think it's okay, the resolution passes with 130 yes, 3 no, and 1 abstention. I call on Ann Brown to introduce resolution number 2.
The resolution before us is establishing minimum clergy compensation for 2022, which was approved unanimously by Diocesan Council. The canons of the diocese require us to adopt minimum compensation standards each year. This resolution sets guidelines for minimum compensation for clergy, including deacons and locally ordained clergy. It sets guidelines for reimbursement for certain expenses, for a minimum merit increase in compensation for clergy and lay employees, and it sets rates for supply clergy. As chair of the Resolutions Committee, I move adoption of this resolution.
I invite Dean Greta Getline to speak to the resolution.
Thank you, Right Reverend Madam. Though I do not serve on the Diocesan Council, I have been asked to speak to this resolution. I will note that Diocesan Council approved it at a meeting before convention. This is largely a routine resolution, as Ann Brown specified, a routine look at clergy compensation and considering cost of living increases each year. A couple of things to note about this resolution this year. While the cash stipend is a 2.5% increase over last year's for all of the positions, for the quarter-time position, it's slightly more. The goal in that was to raise the total cash compensation, which was the cash stipend plus the seeker reimbursement, to $18,000, which is the church pension group threshold for earning 1 year of credited service. There was also an attempt to correct an injustice regarding clergy who are in church-provided housing. As most of you know, when clergy are in church-provided housing, the church is able to count that housing value as part of the cash salary of the clergy. This is true across the whole church. However, when you start looking at part-time clergy who are in church-provided housing, that percentage of value of the house can quickly eat up the actual cash salary, so that you could end up with, say, a quarter-time clergy person who might be in church-provided housing, who then receives 0 cash compensation for their work. While that is legal and the church pension group allows for it, there was a great concern in the leadership of the diocese that this was not a just situation. So what we attempted to do, if you look at the 4th boxes down, was to tier the allowance of a value of church-provided housing only in considering the cash salary that one pays to a cleric. So for a full-time cleric, 30% of that total cash, which is the $69,382 number, can be considered the value of the housing, thus lowering that $69,000 by 30%. For 3/4 time, 22.5%, for half time, 15%, and for quarter time, 7.5%. Please note that this does not affect the way you value housing for paying into the pension fund, nor does it affect the way the cleric is allowed to value housing for taxes. That remains unchanged. We also specified the equity allowance for clergy in church-provided housing at the current rate that the Diocese of Vermont approved sometime before I ever got here, at 4.74% of the total clergy compensation. That is already in effect, though it is not employed fully across the board, which is something that individual churches and the diocese will need to consider as they move forward. If you would just move to the second slide, please. You will note that there is a recommendation for a 2.5% cost of living increase for all compensated clergy and lay employees, and a recommendation, note it's recommendation, for a $500 merit increase for clergy and lay employees. This is a direct response, this merit increase, which is a new thing this year, to what Dr. Davis pointed out in his treasurer's report and the budget, that the government COLA increase this year is 5.9%, which we all agreed was just too much to ask of everyone this year. And so the council felt that recommending a merit increase for parishes that are able to do that would be a good thing to do. And so there it is. Thank you, Right Reverend Madam.
Be ready to remain unmuted so that you can answer any questions about the resolution.
Okay, I see Susan McGarry has her hand up.
Hello. Am I speaking? I mean, can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question about the raising of the minimum for 1/4 time clergy, which is a jump, and I understand the rationale for that. But I want to understand, we're a congregation in that position of raising the salary of a 1/4 time clergy person, up, maybe it's a $1,500 if indeed they're at the minimum right now. Is the diocese suggesting that both that clergy person be raised the $1,500? I think that's what it was when I was looking at it. And then in addition to that, also receive a $500 merit increase. Are those additive when you're in that one category that's different from the others because of that need to get the compensation up to the level that the clergy person can get a year's credit for service? That's my question.
Thank you, Susan. The merit increase is a recommendation only, not a requirement. Each parish will have to decide how they handle that recommendation. I do not know how small parishes will be looking at this particular recommendation for minimum clergy compensation. Off the top of my head, I would say it may be that some parishes will have to look at raising more cash and or stepping up to that to get to the minimum. Perhaps it might take them 2 years to get there, but to work toward getting to the minimum as quickly as they are able. Right, Reverend Madam, would you like to comment on that?
I don't have any real comments, except that I just know that we have got to figure out something different so that people have, something close to livable wage, because we are talking about the majority of our priests, that they are part-time. And so what we're doing is not necessarily helpful for the long term, even with small congregations. This will, I'm sure, help us to find some other ways of sharing across congregations.
Thank you.
Okay, wanted to remind the convention folks to be sure to use your raised hand feature and not your reaction feature. That is something that I meant to make a note of earlier today. Steve Marshall has his hand up.
Good evening. My question, I'm Holy Trinity Swanton. My question really is theoretical, and I'm trying to analyze how the 30% housing works, with a full-time parish clergy. If the total compensation is that 69,000 figure, and 30% of that can be allocated to church-provided housing, does that effectively mean the cash stipend potentially could be reduced by the 30% off that 69,000 total clergy compensation?
Thank you, Steve. Yes, that's exactly what it means. And that should not be a new thing. This is not a new thing for clergy and church provided housing. Your parish may use a slightly different formula, but that is the church pension group's recommendation.
All right, so if you have, so the minimum stipend, if you go back to that earlier slide, to the main resolution, it shows minimum clergy stipend, I believe 67,000.
69 and change.
64,451. Added to that is the SICA, and then you arrive at 69. So if you took 30% off the 69, potentially you're down to 48,000 for a cash stipend. So I'm confused.
That is correct.
So
that is correct.
Okay, so I'm just confused because you've got the 64,000 and then you've got the 69. So I'm just trying to clarify in my own mind
Right.
what the potential is, so I can address it appropriately with our clergy and the vestry and so forth.
Figuring out the housing thing is always an interesting process. I would recommend that you perhaps go to the church pension group's main website and look at their compensation guidelines. They're very clear about how to calculate these things. I will say that the equity allowance also needs to be added to that total cash before you adjust the 30%.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jane Lolax.
I'm Jane Lolax. I attend St. Dunstan's in Waitsfield. And I am just wondering what the recommended stipend reimbursement for a supply priest will be now.
Thank you, Jane. I believe that's a couple slides down. Would you mind going to that, Sophie? There it is. I don't believe it's changed from last year.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Jane. Are there further questions?
I do not see any other hands raised.
Thank you. I will turn this back to Ann Brown.
Thank you. If there are no hands raised, this goes back to Bishop Shannon.
Okay, thank you, Anne. The matter before us is resolution number 2, establishing minimum clergy compensation for 2022. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to approve the resolution, vote no to reject the resolution. Is it finished?
Looks like we have 87% to 3 to 5.
All right. So the resolution passes with 127 yes votes, 3 no, and 5 abstentions. I call on Ann Brown to introduce resolution number 3.
Thank you, Right Reverend Madam. Our third resolution, sponsored by the Reverend Canon Walter Brownridge, is establishing a strategic task force on financing and governing structures. The resolution commends Bishop Shannon's initiative in leading a comprehensive study and analysis of the finances and financial reporting and governing structures at all levels of the diocese. And it asks for the establishment of a task force that will work in the coming year to address appropriate models for finance and governance going forward and report its findings to the 2022 Diocesan Convention. This work will dovetail and perhaps be integrated to some extent with the work of Thrive, about which we will hear more on Saturday. As the chair of the Resolutions Committee, I move adoption of this resolution.
I invite Canon Walter Brownridge to speak to this resolution.
Excuse me. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Briefly, this resolution is designed to address a particular function within our canons that relates to the work of Thrive, which we'll talk more about on Saturday, but coming out of a review of our financial situation and our structures for finance, but also governance that occurred in June. Thrive came out of that, but besides the recommendations about that work in the areas of governance and leadership, as well as on innovative, missional, evangelistic ministries, was the idea of looking at how our financing and governing structures need to be more integrated, more effective, and efficient. And that after study and consultation with our Chancellor, Tom Little, with others in the diocese, it was determined that our current Canon 10, which relates to our diocesan finances, and only lists a committee known as the Financial Oversight and Audit Committee, that something more was needed. One of the things that Tom Little brings to everything, which is why I really appreciate him, is that he has historical memory. In the past 30 years, the diocese has had several different types of, about every 10 years, attempts to address this issue. And whether it's now 10 years and it's due, but I think more so because of our reality today, we need to do this. And so this resolution is designed to approach this, and it is intended to work with Thrive. In fact, what we'll essentially do is the focus group that is working on the financial aspects of the diocese, and Dean Greta is, in fact, I believe, leading that small focus group, but I am involved as well as several other people, will be the ones to actually present next year to convention, first to diocesan convention, first to diocesan council in the spring or summer, and then in the fall to present canonical changes to Canon 10. If there are questions, I'm available, although I think it's fairly self-explanatory if you can see it on your screens or in your other material.
Are there any questions?
Discussion?
I do not see any hands up, Bishop.
Okay. The matter before us.
Oh, actually, David, sorry.
Okay.
David Ganter.
Can you scroll it so we can see the further? The further? Okay. All right, thank you.
There are no hands raised, Bishop.
Oh, I thought David had something to say.
No, he was just asking if they could lower the slide so he could read it completely.
Does anyone else need to speak to it before we move on to the next thing? You see any hands?
I have no hands, Bishop.
Okay. Well, the matter before us is resolution number 3, establishing a strategic task force on financing and governing structures. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to approve the resolution, vote no to reject the resolution.
Looks like it's settled down.
Well, the resolution passes with 132 yes votes, 1 no, and 5 abstentions. Thank you. I call on Anne Brown to introduce resolution number 4.
Thank you, Bishop Shannon. This resolution, enter Barbara Clementine Harris into the church calendar, asks that diocesan conventions submit to general convention, which meets in July 2022, a resolution that would include the Right Reverend Barbara Harris in the calendar of the church to be celebrated March 13th. Bishop Harris, the first woman bishop in the Anglican Communion, elected in 1988, served as bishop suffragan in Massachusetts and was a powerful witness for justice in the Episcopal Church. This resolution is virtually identical to resolutions being sent to General Convention from dioceses across the church and will help make the case for including her on the church calendar on the anniversary of her death in 2020. As chair of the Resolutions Committee, I move adoption of this resolution.
I invite Canon Walter Brownridge to speak to this resolution.
Thank you, Right Reverend Madam. Just simply put, I think many of you in this diocese have heard of Barbara Harris. I'm honored that both Anne Brown and Lee Crawford are co-sponsoring on this. I believe both of them were present at her consecration in 1989. I would just say one thing that some people might wonder about is why relatively soon after someone's death in the church that we are doing so, of wanting our Episcopal Church through its 80th General Convention to put Barbara Harris on the calendar of the church here. And I would just say that, first of all, the principle of doing so is part of who we are as a people of a story, God's story, and how God's power works through human beings and individuals, which has happened from the beginning of the church in the first century to today. And that someone like Barbara Harris, in what a groundbreaker she was, what a not only layperson, priest, and bishop who did much in each of those orders of the church, layperson, deacon, priest, and bishop, that for her to be recognized for what she was, and particularly for how challenging it would have been for her to be the first in any room. I can't remember, Bishop Shannon is now, we don't even know, among women in the worldwide Anglican Communion who have been elected and consecrated to the episcopate. We don't have that number, but Bishop Shannon would share with this and all women bishops that they owe a debt of gratitude to Barbara Clementine Harris. And the fact that she was so willing to stand and be that first is why I know the people of the Diocese of Massachusetts who approached me that would the Diocese of Vermont be willing to be one of the other co-sponsoring dioceses. We are honored to do so for that reason.
Is there any discussion? Or anyone else that would like to speak to this matter?
Bob Leopold.
Thank you. And Ken and Walter, please remain unmuted in case you need to answer something.
Thank you, Right Reverend Madam, for the opportunity. So it may have changed, but I was a deputy to General Convention 2006, where I was on Prayer Book Liturgy and Music Committee. And a resolution came before the whole House of Deputies, C016, about entering Thurgood Marshall's Day as a day of remembrance on the commemoration of Brown versus the Board of Education decision. And it was passed from the floor of convention, but sent to committee. And once it got to committee, it was shot down because the man had not been dead long enough. So I don't know if the rules have changed. I'm of course in favor of honoring both Thurgood Marshall and Barbara Harris. But I just don't know. Can anyone speak to that? Have the rules changed since 2006?
This is Anne. We have since then included people in the calendar who have not been dead for whatever it was, 50 years, I think. We've included Thurgood Marshall and we've included Jonathan Myrick Daniels, and there may be others, but it is up to the committee, the Legislative Committee on Prayer Book Liturgy and Music, as to whether they will make the recommendation or not. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's been so promulgated.
Thank you, Anne. The Reverend Stan Baker.
There, I think I'm unmuted. As some of you know, I sit on the Standing Commission on Liturgy and Music for the Transnational Church, for the big church. These, Barbara Harris has been discussed at length, and our group is very much in favor of this happening. What we have here in terms of the length of time somebody has been deceased is really a guideline now. It's not a hard and fast rule. So if there are local celebrations already going on and recommendations from dioceses as we're making now through this resolution, I think that the church is able to pass those, and I think they will and should, with great thanks to Bishop Barbara Harris.
Thanks, Stan.
Thank you, Stan. Reverend Canon Brownridge has his hand up.
Thank you, Secretary. And I just wanted to just affirm what the Venerable Archdeacon just said, that we have already, as a diocese in March of this past year, we're one of those dioceses that already had a local commemoration on the Sunday closest to March 13th with the Green Mountain Abbey worship. Bishop Harris was commemorated, and Bishop Shannon, who was the preacher at that service, took note of that as well. And that is part of the, if you will, informal, which then evolves into a formal system of recognition of local commemorations in various dioceses and local communities. And there were many around the Episcopal Church, I'm told.
Thank you. You are Bishop Shannon and then Linda Maloney.
And I would say that there were at least five congregations in the diocese that also commemorated Bishop Barbara Harris as well.
Linda Maloney.
Right, Reverend Madam and Convention, I just want to say that I think it's a wonderful idea to add people to our calendar while there's still those around us, around about, who remember them. and can tell stories about them and share them with other people. So it is timely.
Are there any other?
I do not see any other hands raised, Bishop.
Thank you. The matter before us is resolution number 4, entering Barbara Clementine Harris into the church calendar. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to approve the resolution. Vote no to reject the resolution. The resolution passes with 133 yeses, 1 no, and 2 abstentions. Thank you. I call on Ann Brown to introduce resolution number 5.
Thank you, Reverend Madam. Affirmation of diverse gender identities is sponsored by 5 clergy persons serving in the diocese. It asks that we in our churches fully embrace, respect, and uphold transgender and non-binary people in all facets of our church life. It also asks for a committee to work with wider church institutions to cease practices that force choosing only male or female as a condition of obtaining health care and retirement benefits for gender diverse employees. As chair of the Resolutions Committee, I move adoption of this resolution.
I invite the Reverend Rachel Field to speak to this resolution.
Thank you, Right Reverend Madam, and thank you, Anne. The resolution, as Anne mentioned, is in 2 parts. The first is an affirmation of the dignity of transgender and non-binary persons in the church. And the second really puts a little bit of teeth around that affirmation, calling, well, specifically the secretary of this convention, but with a committee if needed, to support the writing of a letter to the church pension group so that anyone in the church pension, Episcopal Church Medical Trust, can choose to use a designation X rather than having to have male or female as a part of their medical benefits or healthcare benefits. Just to note, this is a common practice in more than 14 states, as well as in New York City and Washington, D.C., that people on their driver's licenses can have male, female, or X. And this would go a long way to affirming the dignity of trans and non-binary persons, as well as offering real immediate benefit to their support of gaining healthcare in a way that is good for them. I think that's all I have to say on it. So happy to turn it back to you, Anne, or open for questions.
Thank you. So is there any discussion? And also, Rachel, please remain unmuted so that if there are any questions, then so we'll begin our time for discussion, if there's any.
Thank you, Bishop. I am not seeing any hands, but we'll give that just a moment. Do not have any hands up, Bishop.
Thank you. The matter before us is resolution number 5, affirmation of diverse gender identities. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to approve the resolution. Vote no to reject the resolution. Okay. The resolution passes with 128 yes votes, 4 no, and 4 abstentions. Thank you. I call on Anne Brown to introduce resolution number 6.
Thank you, Right Reverend Madam. The next two resolutions ask us to forward to General Convention 2 resolutions adopted by our Diocesan Convention in 2018. This would be done through a process called Memorializing the Convention. In General Convention terms, a memorial is not just a means of acknowledging someone who has died. It can also be a way of providing information to a legislative committee regarding something a diocese has done that relates to a topic being considered by that committee. Legislative committees at General Convention are the primary means through which resolutions are considered, and all resolutions submitted, as well as all memorials, are sent to a committee for deliberation and hearings before they come to the houses of bishops and deputies. The sponsors of these two resolutions want to ensure that the work we did here in Vermont in 2018 is considered in context of next year's deliberations. The first of these is, you've got them switched, so I will switch, supporting freedom of speech and the right to boycott. It is included in the explanation to the resolution, the actual resolution itself, just as will be the next one. And the question before us is whether to send it to General Convention as information to be used in all likelihood by the Legislative Committee on Social Justice and International Affairs. We cannot amend the original resolution as it is already an act of our 2018 convention. You see the original at the bottom of the screen. The top is our motion at this convention to send it on to General Convention as a memorial. As chair of the Resolutions Committee, I move adoption of this resolution.
I invite the Reverend Craig Smith to speak to this resolution.
Bishop Shannon and delegates, this is something that we've already done, and the reason or purpose for this memorializing this one and the next one that is to come is to join our voice with a number of voices around the Episcopal Church. We've been working with the Episcopal Peace Fellowship and also in Vermont for Vermonters for Justice in Palestine. So there's a larger sort of community that's speaking here. I'm going to read this statement that's from Linda Gaither, who is the Palestinian Israeli Network convener for the Episcopal Church Peace Fellowship. And I'm sorry I don't appear on video. That went to pot yesterday. The mission of the Episcopal Peace Fellowship's Palestine-Israel Network is to awaken and educate Episcopalians on the deepening human rights crisis of Palestinians, both Christians and Muslims, in Israel and the occupied territories. For over 40 years, the Episcopal Church has passed strong resolutions at General Convention calling for peace with justice in Palestine, Israel. But nothing has changed for the better in the Holy Land. The brutality of Israel's 50-year military occupation is intensifying. The settlement movement is expanding. Evictions and house demolitions occur daily in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, while Gaza is at the point of humanitarian collapse. As people of faith, we must live up to our baptismal promises, not just in words, but also in actions that take our church policy seriously. We must build on that foundation to become a forceful voice with our ecumenical partners for a just peace. To build up our church's forceful voice, Episcopal Peace Fellowship is working with activists in a number of dioceses on resolutions addressing the Palestinian crisis, including the resolution Vermont is considering today. Successful resolutions passed since General Convention 2018 should be submitted to the General Convention 2022 with appropriate language attached, including the 2 resolutions passed in Vermont in 2018 on the Leahy Law and the freedom of speech. Episcopal Peace Fellowship will be submitting 3 resolutions and 1 memorial for consideration at General Convention 2022. They have to do with on the theological and political positions of Christian Zionism, the right to boycott on behalf of Palestinian human rights, and condemning Israel's apartheid regime. The pin memorial is entitled Palestinian Human Rights and addresses 40 years of the Episcopal Church's policy in the context of rapid and intensifying deterioration of human rights for Palestinians. I'm glad to hear some discussion on this.
So to clarify, Craig, since Anne moved the resolution about the freedom of speech, and you covered all of them, actually, all of the several resolutions. And so I think as a matter of, what is it, parliamentary correctness? We have to start with the one that was,
Right, yes.
yes, we'll start with that one first, right?
Right, I just was sharing that because it will apply to the other 2.
Great, yeah, yeah, so that just so that other people will know that we are voting on what we're calling now Resolution 6, supporting freedom of speech and the right to boycott.
Right.
So are there questions? Is there any discussion or questions about that? And Craig, please remain unmuted so that you can speak to those.
Okay.
Beginning the discussion is Lisa Newton.
Thank you.
Unmute. Okay. Yeah, this strikes me as all 3 resolutions strike me as unworthy of this convention and irrelevant to what we want to do within this diocese. Essentially, it amounts to name calling. At least the first one did. Let's call whatever is happening in Israel and Palestine apartheid, as if that would accomplish anything. I know something about apartheid, and I don't think it does apply. The Leahy law does not apply. Because we're not talking about the independent militias or military units that are in violation of human rights. This, of course, is a huge debate, but there's nothing obvious about it. And I would think possibly that this diocese is wasting its time and misleading its mission to get involved in this. I had a whole prepared statement on this when I thought we were just going to be taking up the first of those 3 resolutions one at a time. But I don't think at this point it's relevant. I was not able to follow, probably not all of us were able to follow, the memorial, the notion of a memorial in which we reaffirm something that happened several years ago at convention. It isn't clear to me why we are even talking about this. How does this resolution help us be part of the Jesus movement? How does it help us to follow Christ, loving neighbors, leading the poor, feeding the poor, and all that good stuff? I think that these 3 resolutions take us outside our central concern at this point, and I would like to oppose all 3 of them. Thank you.
I have no comment. I believe we have, I believe we see this differently, and I think we've expressed very clearly how this relates to our Christian faith. So I have nothing to defend.
Good evening. This is Tom Little, Chancellor. The Bishop has asked me to comment now. The question before the convention is whether the convention should adopt the supporting freedom of speech and the right to boycott resolution that's on the screen now. We need to take these up one at a time. So the questions, comments, and debate now need to focus on the resolution on the screen, supporting freedom of speech and the right to boycott. Briefly, the notion of a memorial, which is an antique use of the word memorial, we concede that, is simply presenting something that this diocese adopted in 2018 as something that the legislative committees at the General Convention should consider when deliberating about whatever it is that they are going to vote on as a committee. But please direct your questions and comments to this one proposed resolution until we take a vote on that.
Thank you, Chancellor. The discussion continues. I see Linda Maloney has her hand up.
Yes, dear friends, I favor this resolution. It is a general resolution. It is not directed at any particular state or entity, but simply maintaining our freedom as religious persons to exercise that freedom by boycotting, and also in our business proceedings to make decisions about nations and groups with whom we will or will not deal. I don't particularly apply it to Israel, although Israel seems to be the biggest sinner right now, as far as I can tell, because of our intimate relation with Jews and Judaism. We have a stance in faith about how to deal with others in our own place. And given our immigration policies, somebody might want to boycott us, and they should have that right, and so should we. I may say also that there have been movements in certain political circles to make it against the law for American institutions to boycott other countries, and we want to avoid that.
There are no other hands.
Okay. So the matter before us is resolution number 6, supporting freedom of speech and the right to boycott. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to approve the resolution, vote no to reject the resolution.
Yes.
Passes, yes, okay. The resolution passes with 116 yeses, 4 noes, and 15 abstentions. Thank you.
Don't know that Craig needs to be.
So we can move on to the next resolution. application of the Leahy laws, Israel, and Craig has already spoken to each of these resolutions, but also I invite you, Craig, to remain unmuted so that if there are questions that you are available to answer. Are there?
Bishop Shannon, I have just something to clarify.
Oh, yes.
We're not voting on the content of the resolutions that are to be memorialized. We are voting on whether we want to forward what we acted on in 2018 to the General Convention as an act of expressing our voice on legislation that is coming up. That's what we're voting on.
Right.
All right.
And actually, I should be calling on, I think we're on number 7, yes. So I call on Ann Brown to introduce resolution number 7.
Thank you, Bishop Shannon. Resolution 7, like Resolution 6, is about sending a resolution we passed in 2018 on to General Convention for information purposes for a legislative committee. So the question before us will be whether to send it to General Convention to be used by the legislative committee. As I said before, in relationship to the last resolution, we can't amend the resolution that was passed in 2018. What we're voting now is whether or not we want to send this on to the legislative committee. So as chair of the resolutions committee, I move adoption of this resolution.
Is there any discussion?
I'm not seeing any hands, Bishop Shannon, for discussion.
Okay. So, I'm trying to see which one it is. The matter before us is resolution 7, application of the Leahy laws to Israel. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to approve the resolution, vote no to reject the resolution.
Okay.
All right, the resolution, we will pass a resolution on to General Convention. We have 105 yes, 11 no's, and 15 abstentions. Thank you. I call on Ann Brown to introduce resolution number 8.
Thank you, Right Reverend Madam. Unlike the 2 previous resolutions, recognition of apartheid in Israel-Palestine is like the one we considered on Bishop Harris. It asks us to forward a specific resolution to be considered by General Convention through its legislative committee. It is similar to others being submitted by dioceses and organizations such as the Palestine-Israel Network, from which organization Craig read a statement. In this case, we're asked to debate the substance of the resolution. It invites us to consider that actions of Israel with regard to the Palestinians meet the definition of apartheid, that apartheid is antithetical to the gospel message and to our baptismal covenant, and that General Convention call on the US government to withhold military funding until Israel meets criteria of human rights and international law. As chair of the Resolutions Committee, I move adoption of this resolution.
And Craig, I'm assuming you are unmuted so that you can take questions if necessary. And are there questions and or anyone wanting to speak to the matter?
Well, Bishop Shannon, I and the delegates, I have posted in the chat box, 4 different reference places you might go on the subject of apartheid. Apartheid is a legal definition. It's not a slander. It's just a description of behavior. And so in that matter, it's trying to root it in the objective behavior of Israel toward the Palestinians. And so that's one thing. Bishop Tutu certainly has, from his experience with apartheid, what calls the apartheid between Israel and the Palestinians more severe than was experienced in South Africa. So I'm not going to add more by saying more. There's plenty to say. I want to represent Wafiq, who is somebody who we've been working with, who is a Palestinian, and just a brief statement from him, because I think it lends the personal element to this. Wafiq's story, and he addresses all of you as the honorable delegates. My name is Wafiq Faour. I was born in a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, where my family still resides today. I am not here to talk to you about my immediate family, who have been refugees for 73 years with no right to return to their homeland in Galilee. I am here to tell you the story of their brothers and sisters who became Arab Israeli citizens as of 1948 and have continually faced discrimination and racism under apartheid Israeli laws. I do not use the word apartheid lightly, but in talking to my cousins and reading reports from Israeli human rights organizations, I can tell you that the Israeli government employs a different set of standards towards its non-Jewish citizens than affects every facet and function of daily living. When Israel declared the nation-state law in 2018, 22% of the Israeli population officially became second-class citizens without the same legal and human rights. My family's land in Sha'ab in Western Galilee was confiscated in 1948 by the Israelis after they murdered my mother's father. Since the 1950s, the fresh water in Sha'ab has been siphoned off to provide water in 3 Jewish-only settlements in the nearby hills, which were once all Palestinian lands. The villagers in Sha'ab have been given the filtered sewer water from the settlements to use, and it is now illegal to access the fresh water. Villagers in Sha'ab report that their water often runs yellow and brown. Israelis spend less than 10% of the Arab schools compared to those educating Jewish students. In Nazareth for 44 years, the Israelis have refused Arabs a permit to build an independent Arab university. Crimes in Arab villages are rarely investigated, yet Israelis supply guns to criminals in these neighborhoods, a similar phenomenon to what we have seen here in many inner city Black communities. Recently, human rights organizations have declared in Israel an apartheid government, something my family has known for decades. Thank you for your time, Wafiq.
Are there hands?
Yes, Anna Kennedy.
I'd like to just say that I know the word apartheid calls up strong feelings, and having lived in the West Bank under Israeli occupation, I know that this is an apartheid situation, and we need to stand up as part of the United States, as people of the United States. Israel has
recently, tried to label organizations in the West Bank that have done very serious, careful legal work documenting what's happening to Palestinians. And Israel is now trying to label these organizations as terrorist organizations. It's really important that we as Christians stand up for the rights of the Palestinians.
Lisa Newton.
Quickly, could I ask that Sophie put the next slide up to show the rest of the resolution? Thank you.
Lisa?
Okay, there's a pattern here. What's the filthiest name we can think of? Apartheid will do a very nice job with that. And we're calling names. What on earth is this accomplishing for Palestinians or for the Episcopal Church? The topics brought up are enormously complex. People have been working on them since 1948 at least. And I think that we are being presented just with one side in order to get some kind of condemnation, which will make people feel good if they're after that kind of condemnation. I don't think it's our business. I don't think it's advisable to be reinforcing this. I think I'll leave it at that.
Joseph Fortner.
Thank you. Joseph Fortner from St. Mary's in the Mountains in Wilmington. I'm here to speak out against the resolution. I believe this is a purely political proposal, which if it actually were followed to its complete content, would end the Jewish state of Israel. While it may be claimed that this is a moral position, because it addresses mistreatment under the law, under Israeli law of Palestinians, what is missing from the resolution is a lot of context. There is no similar condemnation of many other states which, in many cases, to greater degrees, persecute minorities and other outgroups, including our Christian brothers and sisters, such as China, Iran, Qatar, Cuba, North Korea, Somalia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, Russia, Congo, Cameroon, India, Mali, and Mauritania. It does not condemn those states and faiths that discriminate, sometimes brutally, against women and gender minorities. It ignores that one of the most egregious violators of the rights of women, the LGBT community, and religious minorities in this area that we're talking about can be the government of the Palestinian territories. This is then a political statement aimed against one country. So far as I can tell, it has been drafted and constructed without soliciting input from representatives of Israel to discuss the history, reasoning, and need for the laws that had been cited. It ignores the conduct of the leadership in the Palestinian territories as to the cause of the suffering of the people in those areas. It is a complex issue, as Lisa said, and it's not something that I believe is an appropriate thing for a resolution from this body. It is improperly selective, and I believe it will serve no beneficial purpose and instead will alienate many people who see this as a purely political act. Thank you.
Susan McGarry. Susan, do you want to speak to this?
Mute. Susan McGarry, as assisting priest in St. Thomas and Grace Brandon. And I spent 2 years of my life studying as a scholar in East Jerusalem, which is both annexed and occupied. And I just want to say that my experience is it is apartheid. I also experienced apartheid in my southern life in Florida before the civil rights movement. I would say that there is something that has teeth in this resolution. Would it, to God, it actually would happen. And that is the resolve to ask the United States government to withhold military funding from the state of Israel. And one thing that is different from many of the states that were just presented to us is also having egregious human rights violations and also oppression, is that in a lot of ways, Israel is a client state of the United States because of the enormous amount of military funding. And would that the United States government actually withhold funding, I think it actually would have some mitigating and stimulating effect on the Israeli government to start addressing, eliminating apartheid laws, respecting Palestinian human rights, and stopping the violation of international law. So would this actually go to the end result and get the government to do that? I think it would have teeth. And I think for all the reasons of justice and striving for justice and peace and being in love and charity with one another as Christians, we should vote yes on this.
And Linda Maloney.
I think it would be well to listen to the voices of those who have been there. And especially one point that stood out for me was the attempt on the part of the Israeli government to declare the people who are opposing the oppression being practiced on the Palestinians, to declare them terrorists. Think what it would mean if for anyone who speaks out against government policy here or anywhere to be labeled a terrorist and prosecuted accordingly. That can't happen. That must not happen.
Thank you, Anne. The Reverend Canon Walter Brownridge.
Hello, I want to, as obvious from the comments on pro and con on this issue, it can become an emotional issue and it can become quite heated. I just want to bring up one perspective for us as Christians. I'm in favor of the resolution. Part of it is because I lived and worked in South Africa, and I've also been to the Holy Land, to Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, the West Bank. And many of those see the parallels, but I understand and respect those who may have a different perspective on it. None of the people I know in South Africa or the United States in favor of this have any desire to see the end of the state of Israel, but they would like to see a two-state solution. And one of the things we don't find useful is I think sometimes how the Palestinian people are caricatured or their leadership, because it's a complex issue on that front as well. For me as a Christian and as an Anglican in particular, my relationships and conduct have been in that region have been largely, besides Jewish individuals, Israeli citizens, but with Anglicans who are Arab Christians who are sometimes Israeli citizens, Arab Israelis, and sometimes they are not because they were born not in Israel proper. But so, for example, the current Archbishop of Jerusalem in the Middle East, Hossam Haoum, was born in Nazareth, as I think we follow someone who was born in Nazareth, and yet his wife, who was born in Ramallah in occupied territory, needed special permission and her children to live with her husband in East Jerusalem at St. George's Cathedral and College, where the bishop resides.
I'm sorry, Canon Brownridge, you are out of time, and we are out of time for discussion.
Sorry, thank you.
The matter before us is Resolution 8, Recognition of Apartheid and Israel-Palestine. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to approve the resolution, vote no to reject the resolution. Does that pass or no? Yes, it does. 89. The resolution passes with 89 votes for yes, 25 no, and 16 abstentions. Thank you. Thank you, Anne, and all of the people who worked on the resolutions. I call on Jenny Ogilvie, Chair of the Nominations Committee, for a report and introduction of nominees.
Our nominee for Provincial Synod, which is uncontested, is the Reverend Dr. Bob Leopold from St. Andrews in Colchester. Our nominee for Rock Point Board, uncontested, is the Reverend Margaret Mathauer from All Saints in South Burlington. Our nominees for Rock Point School trustees, uncontested, are Andrew Bayer, Ron Chesbro, Hannah Mariotti, Frederick Reamer, Andrew Rome, and Jean Marie Severance. Our clergy nominee for Standing Committee, uncontested, is the Reverend Sarah Genolfi. Our lay nominee for Standing Committee, uncontested, is Tricia Ingalls from St. Mark's in Newport. Our nominees for trustees of the diocese, uncontested, are Laurel Broughton from Trinity in Shelburne, David Bullock from St. Mark's in Newport, and Dr. Ann Gio from the Cathedral Church of St. Paul in Burlington. A link to the nominations packet is available in chat.
Were any additional nominations for elected office received by 6:30? I have not checked that yet. Let's see. In my chat box.
No one has notified us.
No, there's none. Okay, thank you. Oh. If there are no other nominations to be made, I call for a motion to close nominations, and I'm gonna have to look to see if there are any hands raised because Joshua had to step out. I don't. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. If there are no objections, the convention will cast one ballot for all uncontested offices. Are there any objections? No. The matter before us is the election of all nominees for uncontested offices. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to elect the nominees for uncontested offices. Vote no to not to elect the nominees. The nominees have unanimously been elected. Thank you. received, I should say. We'd like to recognize members of Diocesan Council. Thank you to Wendy Bessett of St. John the Baptist, to the Reverend Beth Crane of Grace Church, Eric Davis of St. Stephen's Middlebury, the Reverend Heidi Edson of St. Luke's in Chester, the Reverend Paul Gratz of St. James in Arlington, and newly elected, the Reverend Kim Hardy of St. James, Essex Junction, Kathy Hartman of St. John's Randolph, and newly elected Carol Hasselback of St. Michael's, Brattleboro, Barbara Johnson of St. James, Woodstock, newly elected Elizabeth McEwen of St. Mary's in the Mountains, the Reverend Dr. Fred Moser of Trinity Shelburne, the Reverend Zarina O'Hagan of St. John's in the Mountains in Stowe, Sean Ryan of St. Mark's in Newport, newly elected, the Reverend Rob Speenauer of Holy Trinity Swanton, and newly elected Bob Wertz of St. Thomas and Grace. There's an opening for a representative from Mission District 3, which is unfilled, and the name of the new representative for that mission district will be announced in the mountain once the election has taken place. And I would like to give lots of thanks to those members of Diocesan Council whose terms end this year. Thank you so much for serving our diocese in this way. Alice Daly of St. Andrew's Colchester, Colleen Gates of St. Peter's Bennington, the Reverend Mark Priest of St. Martin's Fairleigh, Jean Wilson of St. Mark's Newport, and I should also say that the Reverend Heidi Edson, who was from St. Luke's in Chester, who has retired and is now in the Diocese of Colorado. Thank you. At this time, I announce my appointment of Tom Little as Chancellor. There are other appointments which will be announced at a later date in the mountain. I call on Ann Brown, Chair of the Resolutions Committee, to present courtesy resolutions.
Thank you, Bishop Shannon. We have this year 10 courtesy resolutions. The full text may be found on the diocesan website. I believe the link is being placed in the chat. And the courtesy resolutions recognize and thank either 10 groups or people. The first is thanking our bishop for her exceptional leadership, both during COVID and throughout the year, especially difficult time, having spent a few months when we could all be in person and then bam, the door slammed. And our resolutions committee wants to thank her and wants to have the entire diocese thank her. The second is thanking and commending the diocesan COVID-19 response team, which used to be called the I think it was the Restart team. And they have also been working a lot harder and longer than anyone expected and doing a wonderful job at helping our congregations keep us safe, spiritually and physically healthy. And that we'd like to express our gratitude to them as well as to the congregational leaders, clergy and lay, in implementing these safeguards. It has not been an easy time for anyone, and people have stepped up and done their very best. The next resolution thanks Thrive, which is the new organization that was created this past summer, the Task Force for Hope, Revitalization, Innovation, Vision, and Efficiency. And you can see on the slide the chairs of the group, and we are also resolving that to give thanks for the leadership again of our bishop, and holding and asking that we hold in prayer the leaders who have taken roles of responsibility and offer prayers for the group's success. We know that they will be providing a report back to us at the next convention and look forward to that and hope that we will be open to the leading of the Holy Spirit in that whole process. Again, I recommend that you look at the full resolutions because each of these things that you're seeing on the screen is the resolved themselves, but there's an extensive background for each of these resolutions and they're worth reading. The next resolution thanks and honors our outgoing treasurer, Jerry Davis. We're giving thanks for him and wishing Jerry and his wife delightful times together as they move on to the next chapters of their lives. Again, I hope you'll read the full resolution. The next, thanks and commends Pamela Vandegraff, who has served faithfully as assistant to the bishop, actually since June 2017. That is an error. We will correct it in the full resolution. And we wish her the very best. She is planning to retire later this year. The next resolution. Thanks and commends the Reverend Canon Lee Allison Crawford for her service on the Commission on Ministry, and particularly for her last 6 years as chair of the commission. There is background information on this one too. The next resolution thanks and commends Joshua Cheney, who has served faithfully as secretary of our convention since 2017 when we met at Jackson Gore in Ludlow, and through 2 conventions more with Bishop Ely, including the convention that elected our current bishop, Bishop Shannon, and then one on Zoom, which was strange territory for all of us, and now another on Zoom. And we wish him the very best in his future adventures, including, we hope, other service in the diocese. The next one, thanks and commends Stephen Burnett. Most of us didn't meet Mr. Burnett, but he provided amazing service in helping with the financial assessment for the diocese that he shared with Bishop Shannon and diocesan staff and diocesan leadership. It's a yeoman's job to go through a diocese's finances and sort things out and figure out where we've been and where we need to go. He's been, I believe, the treasurer for the Diocese of Atlanta in the past. But again, you can read about him in the full resolution. The next is thanking and commending Dr. Catherine Meeks, who will be speaking to us on Saturday as part of convention's program. She's executive director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing, and she will be talking to us about dismantling racism. There is biographical information about Dr. Meeks in the full resolution. The last, or no, second to last, well, no, last is thanking and commending Bishop Sean Rowe, who also, we're doing this in advance. Usually we get to do these resolutions after people have done their thing in the early part of convention, but in this case, we're ahead of the game. So we're thanking both Dr. Meeks and Bishop Rowe in advance for their presentations. He is the Bishop of Northwestern Pennsylvania and Bishop Provisional of the Diocese of Western New York, and he will talk to us about how those two dioceses have been collaborating and building partnerships together. So with that, we are finished with the courtesy resolutions, and my thanks again to the committee for their good work on all of these resolutions.
Thank you, Anne. My thanks to the Resolutions Committee. I invite convention to show its approval of the courtesy resolutions by raising their hands. You don't have to do it like the Zoom hands, but like your literal hands. Can you see those, Joshua?
I can see those.
Yeah, okay, literal hands. You can raise more than just one. Vote twice. Only this time. I call on Joshua Cheney, Secretary of Convention, for the approval of minutes.
Thank you, Bishop Shannon. The Dispatch of Business Committee approved the minutes of the 2020 Annual Convention and requests that this convention authorize the Dispatch of Business Committee to approve the minutes of this convention.
I call for a motion that the convention authorizes the Dispatch of Business Committee to approve the minutes of this convention.
All right, so we need a motion. The Reverend Rob Spainhour.
Is there a second?
Scotty Emery Jin.
The matter before us is authorizing the Dispatch of Business Committee to approve the minutes of this convention. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to authorize the committee to approve the minutes. Vote no to withhold authorization. Is it complete?
122, 0 to 2.
Is it complete? Did it stop?
Yeah.
Convention has authorized the Dispatch of Business to approve the minutes by 122 votes and 2 abstentions. Thank you. The date of the next diocesan convention will be Thursday, October 13th online, and on Saturday, October 15th at the Cathedral Church of St. Paul in Burlington. Before we adjourn, I want to remind convention that we will meet again on Saturday morning beginning at 10 a.m. and I will deliver my address. We'll have a service of morning prayer, and we'll hear from Dr. Catherine Meeks of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta, and Bishop Sean Rowe of the Diocese of Northwestern Pennsylvania and Western New York, the co-chairs of the Diocesan Thrive Group and the Diocesan Commission for Land Use History. And there will be a different Zoom link to attend Saturday's programming. If you have not already done so, please register using the link that is now in the chat. I call for a motion to adjourn.
The Reverend Earl Coopercamp.
Thank you. And is there a second?
Scotty Emery Jin.
The matter before us is adjourning the 188th convention of the Diocese of Vermont. Please indicate your vote using the Zoom poll that will appear on your screen. Vote yes to adjourn. Vote no, not to adjourn. Okay, so we have 120 saying yes to adjourn and 1 abstention. So we shall adjourn. Thank you all. See you on Saturday morning, and I'm going to just say a quick prayer for us. Oops. Prayer scooted away. Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night, and give your angels charge over those who sleep. Tend the sick, O Christ. Give rest to the weary. Bless the dying. Soothe the suffering. Pity the afflicted. Shield the joyous, and all for your love's sake. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
The mighty and merciful Lord, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, bless us and keep us. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. Blessings on your evening.